In the second lesson, we took our first look at entrepreneurship. We said that, in a broad sense, entrepreneurship coincides with human action. We defined human action, and we considered the elements that comprise it, and so we covered the fundamental concepts of economics: ends, value, means, utility, cost, time, etc. Well, today we are going to take another step and introduce a stricter, more in-depth, detailed view of entrepreneurship.
Más estricto de función empresarial. Y vamos a definir la función empresarial en esta segunda.
To begin our more in-depth approach, we will define entrepreneurship as the innate capacity of every human being, every man, every woman,
Para darse cuenta de las oportunidades
to recognize the profit opportunities which arise in his or her environment or surroundings,
en su derredor y actuar
and to act accordingly to take advantage of them. That is the definition of entrepreneurship. Notice, the capacity to recognize, to discover, to create, because there is no difference between recognizing something we were unaware of before and creating something in our minds. So we are defining an innate creative capacity human beings possess. What is it that most distinguishes us from animals? It is precisely that animals are not capable of creating anything from nothing. No matter how smart dogs or monkeys may seem, they still behave just as they did 50,000 or 100,000 years ago. While for some reason, human beings have this capacity for creativity. We are able to constantly discover and create new information about ends and means. Let us explore the implications of entrepreneurship as we have defined it. According to Kurtzner, the exercise of entrepreneurship requires a special alertness.
perspicacia. Él en inglés lo escribe de la siguiente manera. Dice,
That is the word he chooses. Alertness. To be alert.
estar alerta.
Think of soldiers. Look alert!
¡Alerta! Pues con nuestra
When we are alert, our attention is focused on what may happen.
pasar. Concentraos en
We are concentrating on spotting anything new that may come up.
aproximativa y
This is a rough explanation,
de describir lo que significa el
an
término
attempt to show how the term alertness relates to entrepreneurship.
empresarial. Miren, cuando yo
When I
traduzco
translated Kurtzner's works into Spanish, I used the term perspicaz for alert, because, as we read in the dictionary of the Spanish Royal Academy, perspicaz applies to vision, or a gaze which is far-sighted and very sharp, a person who can see far into the distance, a lookout who scans the horizon, a lookout with some hunters on a hunting reserve. He or she has vision or a gaze which is far-sighted and very sharp. Well, this idea also corresponds closely to qualities a creative entrepreneur needs.
el término perspicaz
Furthermore, the term perspicaz may even sound a bit more dynamic than alerta. Estar alerta seems a little more static. I'm alert in my watchtower and keeping my eyes open for pirates.
si ustedes van a
If you go to the Mediterranean coast, the Balearic coast for example, you will see that there are small lookout towers, atalayas in Spanish from Arabic, placed every few miles along the coast. What were they for? They were manned by alert watchmen who kept an eye out for Barbary pirates. Frequently these pirates would land, raid the coast and capture everybody prisoner.
esta idea de estar alerta,
The idea of being alert, or better still, perspicaz,
tratando de adelantarse a los
of trying to anticipate future events,
recoge de una manera
comes quite close to the meaning of entrepreneurship, in the sense conveyed by inemprehendo, prehendi, prehensum,
capacidad de descubrir.
the capacity to discover or realize something, to create something.
Otro término
So, we have talked about alertness, being alert, alerta, or perspicaz. Now, let us add another term, speculator.
especulador.
You may be thinking, what is the professor saying? Speculators? They should all be put in jail. We imagine greedy speculators who are trying to hoard goods in order to impoverish the masses. Everything that comes to mind when we think of speculators is derogatory. Land speculation. Oh, that's the worst. Not so, ladies and gentlemen. The word speculator derives from the Latin specula. Do you know what a specula was? What did the ancient Romans mean when they used the Latin word specula? A specula was precisely a lofty tower from which a watchman would scan the horizon in an attempt to see the enemy's movements far ahead of time, when enemy forces were still far away. That is what a specula was, one of those towers, and that is the origin of the word speculator. And the meaning of speculator also applies to the most intimate essence of an entrepreneur. He is always alert, or perspicace, so that he can anticipate future events, find out consumers' future tastes and desires, try to satisfy the needs of millions of consumers in a better way, with goods or services of higher quality, at lower prices, and before everyone else. Or in the artistic field, for instance, filmmaking. To be able to convey an idea in a movie in an original and attractive way. To do that, you must be a speculator, one who is alert, or perspicace, a creator. Because that is what an entrepreneur is. An entrepreneur is essentially a creator. Mises makes a curious comparison between the entrepreneur and the historian. He says that the historian finds himself in a very peculiar situation. The historian faces a huge mass of historical data, which is enormously complex, both qualitatively and quantitatively, and he or she tries to make sense of it. To do so, the historian must be alert. He must be able to select the items he believes were of crucial importance or determining factors in the historical events he is studying, and order these items in terms of significance. The historian is not a scientist, but rather an artist. History is an art more than a science. Two historians who are equally honest, and neither of whom has any desire to distort history, may attach more or less weight to the different causal factors they consider most vital, and thus they may present different versions of history, but their versions are not necessarily false as a result. So, Mises tells us that the alertness the historian develops regarding the events of the past is very similar to the alertness the entrepreneur develops regarding the events of the future. And as you know, the future is not to come, but to be made. Good, we understand each other. So, according to Mises, an entrepreneur is someone who looks, as it were, with the eyes of a historian into the future. What a lovely definition. And, believe it or not, if professional historians reflect on the idea we are developing of entrepreneurship, they will discover that their work is essentially entrepreneurial, and that if they apply their abilities to the future, they can become magnificent entrepreneurs. This is simply an example of the exercise we did here. Do you remember when we closed our eyes and we recalled the most satisfying moment from our summer vacation? Immediately afterward, we closed them again and we imagined the future. Both times, we performed exactly the same action. There is no difference in our minds between recalling the past and imagining the future. Well, if we apply that to what we have been discussing, we see why Mises defines an entrepreneur as one who looks with the eyes of a historian into the future. However, I would like to put a finishing touch on the message of my teacher, Ludwig von Mises. So, I am going to offer a further definition. I do love the one Mises gives us. An entrepreneur is someone who looks with the eyes of a historian into the future. That being the case, I am going to complete his definition by defining a historian. A historian is one who looks with the eyes of an entrepreneur into the past.
epígrafe 2 se titula
Section 2 is entitled Information, Knowledge and Entrepreneurship. We are now going to take another step in deepening our analytical understanding of entrepreneurship. Whenever an entrepreneur discovers or creates a profit opportunity, he is really creating or discovering new information and new knowledge in his mind. Information and knowledge he did not have even a fraction of a second earlier.
Una centésima de segundo antes no tenía. Por eso, a partir
We are now beginning to connect our whole theory of entrepreneurship with a theory of knowledge or information.
porque percibir,
When a creative human actor, an entrepreneur, perceives, realizes, discovers or creates new ends, means and profit opportunities in any sphere in which she acts, whether it be strictly commercial or academic or philanthropic or artistic, an alteration or change always takes place in her mind with respect to the knowledge she had before.
conocimiento que previamente tenía. ¿En qué sentido? En el
In
sentido
what sense? In the sense that we are constantly discovering new ideas that we did not have before. They may have been latent. Maybe one part was in one place and another part was somewhere else in our minds, and we felt a bit restless.
y estamos como inquietos.
When suddenly, eureka! The entrepreneurial light goes on, and we make a connection. We connect a scrap we had here with another over there, and it occurs to us that we can do something. At that moment, the light goes on, and we generate knowledge that we did not have before. We gain inspiration from our impressions of the past, but our impressions of the past are subjective. Many times, they are figments of our imaginations, and it is as if these impressions were floating around in our subconscious. Though I am trying to describe this feeling to you, it should not be too difficult for you to identify with it, because we are all human, and we experience this all the time. Many times we are restless. We get up and we are shaving or doing something else, and we feel uneasy. There is an idea forming under the surface. There are elements floating in our minds, and our subconscious is about to creatively push them to the surface, when suddenly, eureka! We see it now. Why didn't we think of it before? With these bits of inspiration, we can build a small personal computer and make it available to millions of families and put an end to mainframes, those gigantic computers. Or we can devise an operating system, or write a screenplay. We generate new information that we did not have before. So, starting today, in class, and this is going to be exciting, we are going to focus on the specific characteristics of the information or knowledge we human beings generate when we create. That is, we are going to answer the following question. What are the features of entrepreneurial information or knowledge? This lesson is very important. In fact, it is worth its weight in gold.
Porque vamos a entrar, vamos a
For we are going to understand. We are going to comprehend.
hablar sobre un tipo de
We are going to talk about a type of information or knowledge that no one has told us anything about until today. Until right now.
Vamos a hablar del conocimiento empresarial subjetivo.
We are going to talk about subjective entrepreneurial knowledge.
Es un conocimiento,
This type of knowledge is silenced.
es un conocimiento
It is looked down upon.
valuado. Es un conocimiento
It is devalued. It is brushed aside.
que hemos nacido.
From the day we were born until today, everything we have been taught in elementary school, in high school, in college, so far, has involved a radically different type of knowledge, scientific knowledge. It seems that whatever is not univocally, unequivocally and formally reflected in books, whatever cannot be stored in a formal manner and expressed in writing or formulas does not matter at all. What a grave error! For to be successful in life, the type of information or knowledge we need is not this type, the type they have tried to teach us, but instead entrepreneurial knowledge, which I am going to explain now. We use the same term, knowledge or information, to refer to two completely different realities. On the one hand, scientific knowledge, which has motivated attempts to deify human reason, particularly in the last century. And on the other hand, practical, subjective, entrepreneurial knowledge, which is of crucial importance in the life of each of us because it enables us to be successful and to achieve the ends we set for ourselves. So, we are going to focus on this second type of knowledge, practical, subjective, entrepreneurial knowledge, because it is the most important to the life of civilization. It is far more important than scientific knowledge. Furthermore, and I repeat, it is ironic that no one teaches us about this type of knowledge, that no one theorizes about it, or even acknowledges its existence. Until today, here in this classroom, where you have the opportunity to come into contact with it.
Hasta hoy, aquí, en esta clase, en el que ustedes tienen la oportunidad de entrar en contacto con él.
What are the characteristics of entrepreneurial knowledge? We will study basically 6 features, and we will consider each in detail. First, entrepreneurial knowledge is subjective and practical knowledge,
Subjetivo,
rather than scientific
no
knowledge.
científico.
Second, entrepreneurial knowledge is exclusive knowledge,
Privativo.
and we will see what that means. Third, entrepreneurial knowledge is dispersed.
Está disperso. Si quieren ustedes,
It is spread out.
diseminado.
Fourth, entrepreneurial knowledge is inarticulate and cannot be formally expressed.
Articulable.
We say it is tacit knowledge.
Es un conocimiento que llamamos tácito.
Fifth, entrepreneurial knowledge is created from nothing. It emerges ex nihilo, ex novo, whenever human beings act.
Siempre que el ser humano actúa. Y por último,
And finally, sixth, entrepreneurial knowledge can be transmitted. But how is it transmitted? As we will see, it happens very subtly. It is transmitted through extremely complex market processes. And these processes are the object of research in economic science. So, we are coming into contact with a new type of knowledge, which we have called entrepreneurial knowledge. And it has nothing to do with the sort of formalized knowledge we have been force-fed up to now in elementary schools, high schools, and universities. Entrepreneurial knowledge is of vital importance to us. It is the only type that can help us to be successful and achieve our goals. Furthermore, it is a type of knowledge that is transmitted through social processes. In fact, we will define society as the process by which this sort of knowledge is transmitted. This is an abstract concept of society.
la primera característica
The first characteristic of entrepreneurial knowledge is that it is subjective and practical, rather than scientific.
significa esto. Miren, conocimiento
What does this mean?
práctico, praxis,
Practical knowledge, praxis.
acción.
Praxis in Greek means action. As you see, we are turning over the same idea again and
El
again.
conocimiento empresarial es un conocimiento
Entrepreneurial knowledge is subjective. It has a
en el
subject,
sentido de que
and practical in the sense that one cannot acquire it in a formal manner.
yo de pequeño ya les
As I have said before, as a young boy, I was a bookworm. I studied all day long, but I focused on the other type of knowledge, the type that is of almost no importance, lousy scientific knowledge. But I was very proud. I would take a book, a math book for instance, and memorize the contents, geography. I knew all the rivers, etc. So I was a straight A student, and a little pedantic. My grandfather kept my feet on the ground. He used to say, "Son, you've earned very good grades, all A pluses, but there are many things in life you can't learn from books." How right my grandfather was. And our topic today, subjective, practical, entrepreneurial knowledge, is precisely everything you cannot learn from a book. The first characteristic of entrepreneurial knowledge is that it is subjective and practical. Therefore, we cannot obtain it in any medium by a formal, objective method. Instead, we can only acquire it through the concrete exercise of entrepreneurship at a specific time and in a specific place. We can only discover or create that knowledge or grasp it entrepreneurially by acting as entrepreneurs.
Actuando empresarialmente. Por tanto, como si dijéramos, a
In
pie
other
de
words,
obra,
we must be on the job, and we must take chances. I cannot learn how to win a girl over by reading a manual. How to attract women. Step 1,
uno puede tener
Step
más o
2.
menos, pero lo que tiene que hacer es
No.
empezar a actuar.
I may have some idea, but what I have to do is take action. And then, bam! This girl gives me the brush off, and that girl gives me the brush off. And when 18 women have brushed me off, I will have begun to develop, through experience, some subjective, practical knowledge of how to attract women. Entrepreneur. Do you think a person can learn how to be an entrepreneur? No. Some universities have a faculty of entrepreneurial sciences. What conceit! What nonsense! That ought to be illegal, and the dean should be thrown in jail. Entrepreneurial sciences. Listen, if it were possible to learn in college how to be an entrepreneur, there would be no economic problems. The more years we spent at the university, the more millions we would earn later. Mr. Moneybags spent 10 years, 15 million. Pompously named faculties of entrepreneurial sciences teach only repetitive skills for low-ranking employees. The only way to learn how to be an entrepreneur is to put your money on the line in actual entrepreneurial projects. You learn by losing money and by making money. For I repeat, entrepreneurial knowledge is knowledge that can only be acquired by the subject, which is why we say it is subjective and practical, through the performance of the relevant action in its particular circumstances of time and place. You say to yourselves, all right, I've gone to college, and I've studied business or audiovisual communications. I'm going out into the world, and I have a right to a job and a salary of 50,000 euros a year, because I know something now. You know nothing. Not until a company hires you and you begin to solve concrete problems through action. Also, company owners complain, college graduates are untrained and unproductive. What foolish company owners! How foolish!
No pidas peras al olmo de la
A
universidad.
lemon tree does not bear apples. You are never going to find trained college graduates, because the knowledge those people need to help you in your company is knowledge they can gain only by working for your company, for several months or for several years, and by making mistakes, etc. And if company owners are foolish, university officials are doubly foolish when they say, let's design a university that is more closely connected with the business world, so that graduates finish school prepared to solve concrete problems. And in the end, what happens to the university? As its name indicates, a university must present a universal view of scientific knowledge, a view that serves as a foundation for reflection and research.
Se va convirtiendo en una nimiedad.
Well, the university becomes insignificant. It becomes a mere factory that churns out accountants or supposed finance specialists. And the concept of the university is destroyed and disappears.
Miren, ¿ustedes creen que se puede aprender a
Listen,
pintar
do you think a person can learn from a book how to paint like Velázquez?
en un libro? ¿Cómo creen ustedes que aprendió a pintar Velázquez?
How do you think Velázquez learned to paint? His father realized that the boy had talent, that he could draw very well. So what did the father think of doing? Instead of obliging him to study law or medicine,
En vez de obligarle a estudiar derecho,
he sent the promising boy to be an apprentice.
lo metió de
An
aprendiz
apprentice in a painter's workshop.
en un taller de pintura.
A 12-year-old boy in a painter's workshop.
12 añitos en un taller de pintura. ¿Creen ustedes que
Do you think he started painting as soon as he arrived? No. He spent his first years there sweeping the floor, taking out the garbage, and emptying the chamber pots. But in an environment in which there were people painting, a master craftsman, journeymen, and apprentices? As you know, 12-year-old children are like sponges. At that age, our brains soak everything up, and Diego Velázquez was no fool. Chances are he paid attention to the techniques the painters used. He probably noticed the way they painted a cloud or finished a sky. Maybe there was a young painter 4 years older than him, someone he admired, and the eager Velázquez would ask to prepare the oils for him. No, you're too young. And a couple of years later, after much persistence, maybe the older boy let him prepare a mixture of colors. And then, perhaps when he was 16, there was a night when another painter was worn out. and needed to finish a painting by morning, and perhaps he said, "Hey, Diego, those blues up in that corner, finish them for me, will you?" And Diego thought, "This is my chance." And there he was, adding a little blue here and a little blue there. That's the way it works. Don't laugh. That's the way it happened. Velázquez learned how to paint by painting, because that is a practical, subjective type of knowledge. Just as you will take your first steps as film directors or entrepreneurs in any sphere by directing, in an environment in which others are directing, you will watch them. And then when your chance comes, you will take it. Therefore, the first characteristic of entrepreneurial knowledge is that it can only be gained through experience. You cannot acquire it from books, and it is always tied to specific circumstances of time and place. It is very important that you distinguish clearly between practical and scientific knowledge. So please turn to page 40. There, in note 22, you will find a table which shows several items to describe the two different types of knowledge, marked Type A knowledge and Type B knowledge. Since entrepreneurial knowledge is the most important type, we will call it Type A, and we will call scientific knowledge Type B. The name of 4 authors appear in the table. Michael Oakeshott, who was Professor of Political Science at the London School of Economics, Friedrich Hayek, who received the Nobel Prize in Economics and was the star disciple of Ludwig von Mises, Michael Polanyi, and Mises himself. These authors have theorized about what separates the two types of knowledge, as I have explained them to you today, but the authors' approaches have varied slightly. Take a look at the 4 pairs of contrasting terms. Next to Type A, write entrepreneurial knowledge. There we read that it is practical or traditional. In what sense? Note the Latin origin, traditio, traditionis, to hand over. How did the master craftsman in the painter's workshop teach the young Velázquez? Day by day, the teacher gradually and implicitly handed over to his pupil a wealth of practical entrepreneurial knowledge. In contrast, Type B knowledge, scientific or technical knowledge, is formalized. It can be contained in a book. Wouldn't it be convenient if all knowledge were like that? A new apprentice arrives and you tell him, "Here kid, study this book." When you know the book by heart, you can start painting. That would be as easy as saying, "Would you like to be a rich entrepreneur?" Let's see, who wants to be a millionaire? And everybody raises his hand. Who wants to make €1,000,000 a year? Sure, why not? Well, it's very simple. If you want to make €1,000,000, head straight to the Faculty of Entrepreneurial Sciences. There you learn how. And then you walk back outside and presto, €1,000,000. Entrepreneurial sciences. A science. What nonsense! According to Hayek, as we will see, practical entrepreneurial knowledge is dispersed knowledge, in the sense that it is spread throughout the minds of different human beings, while scientific knowledge is centralized knowledge. Another author, Michael Polanyi, focuses on the either tacit or articulate nature of knowledge. Entrepreneurial knowledge is tacit. It is implicit. It is like the message a movie conveys. Maybe a shot of the main character with a certain look on her face communicates a huge volume of practical knowledge, just that image alone. The knowledge is not codified, explicit, or expressed in words. People would get tired of reading lines on the screen, and they would walk out of the theater. Filmmakers want to transmit practical entrepreneurial knowledge that is subjective and cannot be expressed in words. Indeed, the thoughts a movie suggests to us and the feelings it provokes in us are precisely what give it its charm. A movie does not spell everything out perfectly as if it were an article in a scientific journal full of mathematical formulas. And finally, according to Mises, practical entrepreneurial knowledge deals with unique events which are historically unrepeatable, and scientific knowledge deals with classes. What scientists do is classify things, and then study the behavior of the classes. I'd like to wrap up today's lesson with a question. It's kind of a trick question, and every year people fall for it. Economics, economic science. Does it consist of practical knowledge, or does it consist of scientific knowledge? Scientific. Phew! That's right. Last year, when I asked the question, the entire group answered unanimously, practical. It's true that I just spent the whole class period talking about practical knowledge. They were probably thinking, so which is it? Haven't you been saying that the type of knowledge that is important is entrepreneurial, that it is subjective, that it is practical, that it is the type no one has taught us about until now, that this is going to be the first time we hear about it, and that we are very lucky, and now you dump a bucket of cold water over us and tell us you're a scientist after all? Economics is the science that studies, in formal, scientific, centralized terms, the processes of creation and transmission of practical knowledge, and thus the apparent contradiction is eliminated. To put it another way, economics is the science which consists of theorizing about the phenomenon of entrepreneurial creativity, and the processes through which the knowledge entrepreneurs generate is transmitted. I am not going to teach you how to make money. I am not going to teach you how to win a girl's affections. I am not going to teach you how to paint, nor how to run a company, nor how to be successful in marriage. You will have to learn those things for yourselves by facing the harsh realities of the real world as you work and act entrepreneurially in your daily lives. What I am going to teach you is the importance, the undeniable superiority of this type of knowledge, entrepreneurial, practical knowledge, in our lives. We will also talk about the mechanisms and processes through which it is created and transmitted, and which give rise to the wonders of society and the market.